This is the moment the United States crossed a line that allies thought uncrossable. At 2:47 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, February 10th, 2026, the House of Representatives delivered a stunning rebuke to President Donald Trump's war on America's closest neighbor, voting 219 to 211 to block his punitive tariffs on Canadian goods and formally condemning what six Republican defectors called an unprecedented assault on Allied sovereignty. The vote represents the first successful congressional intervention in Trump's systematic campaign to annex Canada as the 51st state, a campaign that has shattered the longest undefended border in the world and pushed NATO to the brink of internal collapse. But this legislative victory came too late to prevent the constitutional crisis that has already transformed North American geopolitics forever. While Congress was voting, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney was in Beijing, signing a strategic partnership with Xi Jinping that signals Canada's definitive pivot away from the United States toward America's greatest rival. The message could not be clearer. When the United States threatens the sovereignty of its allies, those allies will find new partners willing to respect their independence. The House vote that stopped Trump's tariff war began as a desperate attempt by moderate Republicans to salvage what remained of the U.S.-Canada relationship after months of escalating threats and economic warfare. According to sources familiar with the closed-door negotiations, the six Republican defectors included Representatives Don Bacon of Nebraska, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, Mike Lawler of New York, David Valadao of California, and two others who requested anonymity due to fear of Trump's retaliation. These lawmakers broke with their party after receiving classified intelligence briefings that detailed the catastrophic damage Trump's annexation threats were causing to American national security interests. The intelligence assessment, portions of which have been leaked to multiple news outlets, painted a picture of an allied relationship in complete freefall. Canadian intelligence agencies have stopped sharing critical information about threats to North America. Canadian military officials have begun questioning whether NATO Article 5 obligations extend to a country actively threatening their sovereignty. Most alarmingly, the assessment revealed that Trump administration officials have been conducting secret meetings with Alberta separatist groups, encouraging them to break away from Canada and join the United States. These meetings, which began in January, according to intercepted communications, represent an unprecedented American interference in the internal affairs of a NATO ally. The parallels to Russian tactics in Ukraine before the 2014 invasion were not lost on intelligence officials, several of whom compared Trump's Alberta strategy to Vladimir Putin's cultivation of separatist movements in Donetsk and Luhansk. One senior intelligence official told congressional briefers that we are essentially employing Russian hybrid warfare tactics against our closest ally. The revelation that American officials were actively encouraging Canadian provincial separatism provided the final push several Republican lawmakers needed to break with Trump. Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, a former FBI agent, captured the sentiment when he told colleagues during the private briefing, "This is not American foreign policy. This is Putin's playbook being used against our friends." The vote itself was a dramatic affair that exposed the depth of Republican unease with Trump's increasingly authoritarian approach to international relations. House Speaker Mike Johnson, under enormous pressure from Trump to block the resolution, instead allowed it to proceed after several moderate Republicans threatened to break party ranks on other issues if denied this vote. The debate on the House floor was unusually emotional, with several lawmakers directly invoking the memory of past American sacrifices to defend Allied sovereignty. Democratic Representative Gregory Meeks, ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, reminded the chamber that American soldiers died in 2 world wars to establish the principle that powerful nations cannot simply absorb their weaker neighbors. Today we vote on whether America still believes in those principles or whether we have become the aggressor our grandfathers fought against. But it was the speech by Republican defector David Valadao that proved most devastating to Trump's position. Valadao, whose district includes significant agricultural interests dependent on Canadian trade, read from a letter sent by Alberta separatist leader Derek Fildebrandt thanking American friends for their encouragement and support in breaking away from Canada. "Mr. Speaker," Valadao said, "when did the United States of America begin supporting the dismemberment of democratic allies? When did we decide that our role in the world was to tear apart functioning federations rather than defend them?" The constitutional implications of Trump's Canada annexation campaign extend far beyond trade disputes or diplomatic tensions. Legal experts point to the Neutrality Act of 1794, which explicitly prohibits American officials from providing support to groups seeking to overthrow or separate from governments with which the United States maintains peaceful relations. By meeting with Alberta separatists and encouraging their independence movement, Trump administration officials may have violated federal law designed specifically to prevent exactly this kind of interference in allied domestic politics. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe, in an emergency legal brief filed with the House Foreign Affairs Committee, argued that Trump's annexation threats constitute a fundamental violation of international law and American constitutional principles governing the conduct of foreign relations. Tribe's analysis focuses on the president's constitutional obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, including international treaties that recognize Canadian sovereignty and territorial integrity. The timeline of Trump's escalating threats against Canada reveals a systematic campaign that began almost immediately after his inauguration in January 2025. Initially dismissed as rhetorical bluster, Trump's suggestion that Canada could become the 51st state has evolved into concrete policy actions designed to weaken Canadian sovereignty and create conditions for potential annexation. The campaign accelerated dramatically after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau resigned in December 2024, creating the political instability Trump apparently believed he could exploit. Mark Carney's victory in the subsequent Canadian election represented a direct repudiation of Trump's interference, as Canadian voters explicitly chose a leader known for his opposition to American economic dominance. Trump's response to Carney's election victory was swift and revealing. Rather than attempting to build a working relationship with the new prime minister, Trump immediately escalated his annexation rhetoric and began implementing punitive economic measures designed to punish Canada for electing a leader unwilling to submit to American demands. The March 2025 tariff package that imposed 25% duties on all Canadian goods was explicitly framed by Trump as retaliation for Canada's ingratitude and hostile leadership choice. The breaking point in U.S.-Canada relations came during Carney's January 2026 speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where the Canadian Prime Minister delivered what observers are calling the most significant Canadian foreign policy statement since World War II. In carefully measured language that never explicitly mentioned Trump or the United States, Carney declared that the rules-based international order has become a sham, and that middle powers like Canada could no longer rely on traditional alliances with countries that ignore the rules everyone else thought we were living by. The speech was a diplomatic masterpiece that managed to condemn American behavior without providing Trump ammunition for retaliation, but its message was unmistakable. Canada no longer viewed the United States as a reliable partner and would seek alternative relationships with countries willing to respect Canadian sovereignty. Trump's reaction to the Davos speech revealed the thin-skinned authoritarianism that has characterized his approach to international relations. Rather than engaging with Carney's substantive criticisms, Trump responded with personal attacks and immediate punishment. Within hours of the speech, Trump announced that Canada was being expelled from his Board of Peace initiative, a move that surprised even Trump allies who recognized the obvious diplomatic incompetence of publicly humiliating a key ally over policy disagreements. The Board of Peace expulsion represented more than symbolic retaliation. It demonstrated Trump's fundamental misunderstanding of how alliance relationships function in democratic societies. By treating Canadian membership as a personal favor that could be revoked based on Trump's emotional reactions, the president reduced American foreign policy to the level of personal grievance management. International relations experts noted the obvious parallel to authoritarian leaders who view diplomacy as a series of personal transactions rather than institutional relationships between sovereign nations. The economic warfare component of Trump's Canada campaign has inflicted severe damage on both American and Canadian interests while failing to achieve any of its stated political objectives. The 25% tariffs imposed in March 2025 have cost American consumers an estimated $47 billion in higher prices while reducing bilateral trade by nearly 30%. Canadian retaliation has hit American agricultural exports particularly hard, with Midwest farmers losing access to their largest export market, just as global grain prices were beginning to recover from previous trade disruptions. But the economic costs pale compared to the security implications of America's deteriorating relationship with its most important neighbor. Canada controls critical Arctic territory that serves as America's northern defense perimeter against Russian and Chinese military activities. Canadian cooperation is essential for NORAD operations, continental ballistic missile defense, and early warning systems that protect American cities from potential attacks. The intelligence assessment briefed to Congress detailed how Trump's annexation threats have compromised these vital security relationships, potentially leaving the United States more vulnerable to foreign military threats than at any time since the Cold War. The revelation about secret meetings with Alberta separatists represents the most serious escalation in Trump's anti-Canadian campaign. According to leaked intelligence reports, the meetings began in January 2026 when Trump administration officials reached out to Derek Fildebrandt and other leaders of the Wexit movement seeking Alberta's independence from Canada. The American officials reportedly offered unspecified support and encouragement for separatist efforts, while suggesting that an independent Alberta could quickly join the United States as a new state. The historical precedent for this kind of American interference in Canadian domestic politics is disturbing and illuminating. During the 1930s, the Roosevelt administration drew up contingency plans for military action against Canada, but these were defensive preparations for a hypothetical scenario in which Canada fell under hostile foreign control. Never before has an American administration actively worked to dismember a democratic Canadian government or encourage provincial separatism as a tool of foreign policy. International law experts argue that American support for Canadian separatist movements violates multiple international agreements, including the United Nations Charter's prohibition on interference in the domestic affairs of member states and NATO founding principles that require alliance members to respect each other's territorial integrity. If proven in international forums, Trump's separatist support could provide legal justification for NATO to invoke collective defense provisions against the United States itself, an unprecedented scenario that would effectively end the Atlantic Alliance. The Canadian response to American separatist interference has been measured but decisive. Prime Minister Carney has avoided public discussion of the intelligence revelations while quietly taking steps to strengthen Canadian national unity and reduce dependence on American economic and security relationships. The timing of Carney's Beijing visit, coming just days after the House vote on Canadian tariffs, was clearly calculated to signal Canada's determination to develop alternative partnerships regardless of American legislative actions. The strategic partnership agreement signed with China during Carney's Beijing visit represents a fundamental reorientation of Canadian foreign policy away from exclusive reliance on North American integration toward a more diversified approach that includes significant Asian partnerships. The agreement provides for expanded Chinese investment in Canadian critical minerals, reduced tariffs on Canadian agricultural exports to China, and enhanced cooperation on Arctic development projects. Most significantly, the agreement includes security provisions that could eventually provide alternatives to Canadian dependence on American defense relationships. The Chinese partnership announcement has generated intense criticism from American foreign policy establishments who argue that Canada is naively trusting an authoritarian regime that will inevitably exploit Canadian resources and strategic position for Beijing's benefit. These criticisms miss the essential point that Canada's pivot toward China results directly from American actions that made continued exclusive reliance on the United States strategically impossible. When the United States threatens to annex its allies and actively supports domestic separatist movements, those allies have no choice but to seek alternative partnerships that respect their sovereignty. The House vote blocking Trump's tariffs represents an important victory for congressional oversight of foreign policy, but it comes too late to repair the fundamental damage Trump has inflicted on the North American alliance. Even if all current tariffs were eliminated immediately, the precedent of American annexation threats and separatist interference has permanently altered Canadian calculations about the reliability of the United States as a strategic partner. Future Canadian governments will be forced to maintain alternative relationships as insurance against renewed American aggression, regardless of which party controls Washington. The broader implications of Trump's Canada annexation campaign extend far beyond bilateral relations to threaten the entire system of alliance relationships that has anchored American global influence since World War II. If the United States can threaten the sovereignty of Canada, its closest ally and most reliable partner, then no country can feel secure in American alliance commitments. European NATO members are already quietly discussing whether Article 5 mutual defense obligations apply to aggressive actions by alliance members against each other, a conversation that would have been unthinkable before Trump's annexation threats. The timing of the House vote, coming just weeks before critical NATO summit meetings, provides some hope that American institutions can still impose constitutional constraints on presidential overreach in foreign policy. The 6 Republican defectors who joined Democrats in blocking Trump's tariffs have signaled their willingness to break party ranks on other foreign policy issues if Trump continues threatening allied sovereignty. This congressional backbone represents the kind of institutional resistance that democracies require to prevent authoritarian consolidation, but its effectiveness will depend on sustained political courage that has been notably absent throughout Trump's presidency. The ultimate test of American constitutional democracy will come if Trump chooses to ignore the House resolution and continues implementing punitive measures against Canada through executive action. Presidential power in foreign affairs is broad but not unlimited, and Congress retains constitutional authority to regulate international commerce and declare war. If Trump attempts to circumvent congressional opposition through emergency declarations or creative legal interpretations, the separation of powers crisis that has been building throughout his presidency will reach a constitutional breaking point that could determine whether American democratic institutions retain any meaningful check on authoritarian presidential behavior.